A family bought their dream home for $400,000, and 18 months later they were told to evacuate their own basement. Not because of a fire, not because of a flood, because the air itself had become dangerous to breathe, and nobody had seen it coming until it was almost too late. If you're a homeowner, a buyer, or someone who just wants to understand what's really happening beneath the floors you walk on every day, subscribe, because every week we dig into the hidden construction failures that quietly destroy homes from the inside out, long before anyone notices a single sign. The house looked perfect from the outside. Freshly painted siding, a manicured lawn, the kind of curb appeal that makes buyers fall in love before they've even walked through the front door. But underneath that beautiful exterior, in the dark, damp space below the living room, a slow and silent disaster had already begun the moment the foundation was poured. Most people think foundation problems start with cracks. Big, dramatic, visible cracks running up a wall like something out of a disaster movie. But that's not usually how it happens. The real danger starts with something far smaller, far quieter, and far easier to miss. It starts with water finding a path it was never supposed to have. When a foundation is built correctly, the soil around it is graded to slope away from the house. Water hits the ground and rolls away from the structure, the same way rain rolls off a car windshield when it's angled just right. But on this particular job, the crew backfilled the excavation with the same soil they dug out, packed it down quickly, and moved on to the next task on a tight schedule. Nobody checked the slope. Nobody checked the compaction. It looked fine to the eye, and that was enough for everyone to sign off and move forward. But here's where everything changed. Over the following 2 years, every rainstorm pushed a little more water toward the foundation instead of away from it. The soil, loosely packed and improperly graded, acted less like solid ground and more like a sponge sitting right against the concrete walls of the basement. At first, it doesn't seem like a serious problem. A little dampness after a heavy storm, a musty smell that fades after a day or two. Most homeowners simply run a fan, open a window, and forget about it. That's exactly the trap, because while the surface problem seems to disappear, the moisture never actually leaves. It just moves deeper, silently soaking into places nobody thinks to check. Concrete looks solid, almost indestructible, the kind of material you'd assume could handle anything nature throws at it. But concrete is actually porous. Under a microscope, it looks more like a dense sponge than a solid block, filled with countless tiny channels and pathways. When water sits against a foundation wall for long enough, it doesn't just stay on the surface. It gets pulled inside, traveling through those microscopic channels the same way water climbs up a paper towel. This hidden detail changes everything, because now the moisture isn't just outside the house anymore. It's inside the concrete itself, slowly making its way toward the interior basement walls, waiting for the right conditions to become a much bigger problem. Professional builders know this, which is why proper foundations aren't just poured concrete sitting in the dirt. They're wrapped in specialized waterproof membranes, protected by drainage boards that channel water downward and away, and backed by a perforated pipe system buried in gravel, quietly moving water toward a sump pump before it ever gets the chance to reach the concrete. It's an invisible system, tucked away and forgotten the moment the yard is finished being landscaped. But it's the single most important layer of protection standing between a healthy basement and a moldy one. On this particular home, that system was only partially installed. The drainage pipe was there, but it had been laid flat instead of on a slight downward slope, which meant water pooled inside it instead of flowing toward the sump pump the way it was designed to. It's a mistake that's almost impossible to notice from the surface, because everything still looks correct when the yard is closed up. The pipe is buried, the gravel is there, The paperwork says the drainage system was installed. But function and appearance are two very different things, and this is exactly where cheap workmanship and quality workmanship start to separate from each other. What happened next surprised even the homeowners, who had no idea anything was wrong until they started noticing a faint, earthy smell drifting up through the basement door every time it rained heavily. They assumed it was normal. Basements smell a little musty sometimes, right? That's what they told themselves, and that's what most homeowners tell themselves, because nobody wants to imagine a bigger problem hiding behind a simple smell. But mold doesn't need a flood to grow. It doesn't need standing water or a dramatic pipe burst. Mold only needs three things to thrive: a food source, which drywall, wood framing, and even dust provide more than enough of; a comfortable temperature, which most basements naturally offer year-round; and moisture, even in small, consistent amounts. A basement wall that stays slightly damp for weeks at a time is essentially the perfect breeding ground, quietly working in the dark, out of sight, out of mind. Now comes the part that costs homeowners the most money. Because mold doesn't stay contained to one visible patch on a wall, it spreads through wall cavities, behind insulation, underneath flooring, and inside HVAC systems, riding air currents throughout the entire house. What starts as an invisible problem in the basement can eventually affect air quality on every floor above it, turning a foundation issue into a whole house health and safety concern. The family living in this home started noticing something wasn't right long before they saw any visible mold. Their youngest child developed a persistent cough that never seemed to fully go away, even during the warmer months when seasonal allergies should have improved. Headaches became more frequent. A strange, lingering fatigue settled over the household that no amount of sleep seemed to fix. Doctors ran tests. Allergists asked about pets, dust, and seasonal triggers. Nobody thought to ask about the basement, because on the surface, everything still looked completely normal. This is one of the most dangerous aspects of foundation-related mold. It's invisible until it isn't. Families can live with a serious problem for months, sometimes years, experiencing symptoms without any obvious explanation, simply because the source is hidden behind drywall, beneath flooring, or inside a wall cavity nobody has any reason to open. It wasn't until the family decided to finally finish their basement, turning it into a home office and playroom, that contractors ripped into the drywall and found what had been growing there the entire time. Behind a single section of wall, black and gray patches spread across nearly 6 feet of surface area, climbing up from the floor toward the ceiling in a pattern that told an experienced inspector everything he needed to know. This wasn't a recent problem. This had been developing for a long time. There was one critical mistake almost nobody noticed until this exact moment. The insulation installed against the foundation wall wasn't the right type for a below-grade application. Standard fiberglass bat insulation, the pink, fluffy kind most people picture when they think of insulation, had been used instead of rigid foam or specially treated, moisture-resistant material. Fiberglass insulation isn't just unhelpful against basement moisture. It actively makes the problem worse because it holds moisture against the wall instead of allowing it to dry out, creating the exact damp, dark, food-rich environment mold needs to spread rapidly and stay hidden at the same time. At this point, the consequences started stacking up fast. The contractor called in a specialized mold remediation team, and their assessment made the homeowners' stomachs drop. The affected drywall needed to be completely removed, not just the visibly damaged sections, but a wider margin around it, to make sure no spores had spread further than what was immediately visible. The insulation had to be stripped out entirely and replaced with proper moisture-resistant material. And most alarming of all, the foundation itself needed to be excavated from the outside, the drainage system corrected, and a new waterproofing membrane applied, because without fixing the root cause, any interior repair would simply be a temporary fix on a problem that would inevitably return. The total cost of the repair climbed into the tens of thousands of dollars, an expense that could have been avoided entirely with proper drainage installation at the time of construction. It's a painful lesson that plays out in homes across the country every single year, and it highlights one of the most important truths in residential construction. The cheapest mistakes to fix are always the ones caught before the walls go up, and the most expensive mistakes are always the ones discovered after they've had years to grow undisturbed in the dark. But the biggest mistake hadn't even happened yet in this particular story, because when the excavation team dug down along the foundation to correct the drainage system, they found something else entirely. Something that explained why the water problem had been so much worse than a simple grading issue should have caused. The original foundation pour had a cold joint, a visible seam where two separate pours of concrete had met but never fully bonded together. This happens when there's too much time between pouring one section and the next, allowing the first pour to begin curing before the second batch arrives. Instead of forming one continuous, solid wall, the foundation effectively had a built-in seam, a natural weak point, exactly where water pressure from the soil outside was pushing hardest. Most homeowners never notice this kind of flaw because it's completely hidden behind soil on the outside and drywall on the inside. It doesn't show up on a basic home inspection unless the inspector specifically knows to look for the subtle horizontal line where the seam occurs. And even then, it can be easy to mistake for a normal construction feature rather than a genuine vulnerability. This is exactly why professional builders take curing time so seriously, even when it slows down a project schedule. Concrete needs time to properly bond, layer by layer, section by section. Rushing a pour to meet a deadline might save a contractor a few days on paper, but it can create a permanent structural weakness that costs homeowners years down the line, long after the original crew has moved on to other projects and forgotten the shortcuts they took. The correct solution, once everything was finally understood, involved several coordinated steps working together rather than a single quick fix. The excavation crew properly regraded the soil around the entire perimeter of the house, creating the gentle slope that should have been there from the very beginning, guiding water away from the foundation instead of toward it. The drainage pipe was reinstalled with a proper slope, ensuring water would actually flow toward the sump pump instead of pooling uselessly underground. A new waterproof membrane was applied directly to the exterior foundation wall, sealing the surface against future moisture penetration. And the cold joint itself was injected with a specialized epoxy resin designed to fill the gap and restore structural integrity to the seam, essentially gluing the two separate pours back together at a molecular level. Inside the basement, every trace of contaminated material was removed and safely disposed of. New moisture-resistant insulation was installed, paired with a vapor barrier designed specifically for below-grade applications. And critically, a dehumidifier system was added to actively manage humidity levels going forward, giving the family a continuous line of defense, even if a small amount of moisture ever did find its way back in. How could this have been prevented in the first place? The answer comes down to a combination of patience and attention to detail that too many construction projects sacrifice in the name of speed. Proper soil compaction and grading take time and careful verification, not just a quick pass with heavy equipment. Drainage systems need to be installed with the correct slope and physically tested before they're ever covered up and forgotten. Concrete pours need enough time between sections to properly bond, even if that means the project schedule stretches by a few extra days. And perhaps most importantly, homeowners need to understand that a basic visual home inspection, while valuable, often can't catch problems that are hidden behind soil, drywall, and insulation, which is exactly why specialized foundation and moisture inspections exist as a separate, deeper layer of protection. For the family in this story, understanding what happened brought a strange kind of relief alongside the financial burden. The mysterious headaches, the persistent cough, the unexplained fatigue that had followed them for months finally had an explanation, and more importantly, a solution. Within weeks of the repair being completed, the household started feeling like themselves again. Proof of just how much of an invisible impact a hidden foundation problem can have on everyday life. What makes this story so important isn't just the dramatic reveal or the expensive repair bill. It's the reminder that homes are far more complex than they appear from the outside, built from countless individual decisions made by dozens of different workers, any one of which can create a hidden vulnerability if it's rushed or overlooked. A single flat section of drainage pipe, a single cold joint in a concrete pour, a single choice to use the wrong type of insulation. None of these mistakes seemed catastrophic in the moment they were made, but together, over time, they combined into a serious problem that put a family's health and finances at risk. The lesson here isn't to panic about every home you walk into or every basement you step down into. It's to understand that the most dangerous problems in construction are rarely the ones you can see. They're the quiet ones, the ones hiding behind a wall or beneath a few feet of soil, patiently waiting for the right conditions to reveal themselves. Knowing what to look for and knowing which questions to ask before you buy, before you renovate, or before you ignore that faint, musty smell one more time can be the difference between catching a problem early and discovering it the hard way, years later, behind a wall you never expected to open. If this kind of hidden construction story fascinates you as much as it fascinates us, come back next week, because there's always another investigation waiting behind the walls of the homes we think we know best.